Well, welcome, listeners, to another episode of Continence Chat. We appreciate you taking your time to be with us today. My colleague, Susie, unfortunately is going to miss this episode, so I've decided to take this one on my own. And I am here with our guest today, Tracy Cram Perkins, who I think you are going to find her story very, very interesting. I know that she cared for 4 different family members, and she's got an interesting background. Tracy, without further ado, do you mind just sharing an introduction and a little bit about your background? And I know you're an author of Dementia Home Care. I actually got my copy recently, if you can see it. And I made a promise to Tracy that when we meet in person someday, I'm going to hold her to her signature on it. But if you can share some background and what your goals and missions are around home care and caregiving, that would be super.
Oh, thank you very much, Deanna. As Deanna mentioned, I am a 4-time dementia caregiving survivor. I did not have any medical training. I had no understanding of caregiving whatsoever. And I started with my mom back in 2006. She had, up to that point, she'd had cancer, and the cancer surgery gave her dementia. And so then we were dealing with dementia, not knowing what dementia was and not really even knowing where to look to find help. After she passed, we didn't know my father already had Alzheimer's disease. And so they lost everything because this was before the Obamacare came into play. So the insurance cap hit, and he ended up living in a tiny little apartment. And my sister and I were doing wellness checks to make sure it was okay. And she came by one evening after work when it was her turn and found my dad unconscious in his apartment. When he woke up in the hospital a week later, he was diagnosed with moderate Alzheimer's disease. They would not give us, let me rephrase that. They would not give him to me. My sister had power of attorney. We had unwittingly shot ourselves in the foot because she had agreed to take care of my dad. I had agreed to take care of our mom, and we thought that was going to be how we would divide this up equally. Unfortunately, we didn't have the power of attorneys written up that way so that we could share it, which was hindsight would have been really helpful. And so the hospital sent my dad into the system because they believed he would be readmitted for 3 days after we took him home, not realizing that I wanted him to come live with me. So it took us 5 months to get him out of the care. And what had happened really quickly is he knew when he was released into an adult group home, 5 of the 6 patients, him being number 6, were bedridden. He was ambulatory. He didn't believe he had dementia, and he just wanted to go for a walk. And it was in his old neighborhood, but there's only 2 staff members, and they couldn't take the time to have him go for a walk to make sure he got back. They had to take care of everybody else. So he kept escaping when their back was turned. And because we did not understand how dementia worked or how the system worked or anything, we had a very adversarial relationship with the caregivers, which was our fault. We didn't understand. And so when they said they were done, they called the police. The police took him to a geriatric psych ward in a different county, and the staff wouldn't tell us where he was or that he was not even in our county anymore. And so we spent several hours trying to find my dad. We found him 1 county to the north of us. So he was there. We went and saw him. The social services folks told us that we could not have him and that they had 3 days to find someplace for him to stay. They at least got him back into our county so that we could actually visit him. And then a pattern started because he was more with it than most people with moderate dementia, and he kept escaping because he was extremely charming and he kept covering. And so by the time he got to the 5th and most secure facility, he made his last 2 escaped attempts. The number 4, he noticed that there was a problem in the window in his room. And so he waited till his roommate went to physical therapy. He stayed dressed in his pajamas and slippers. He unscrewed the mounting screws in the window, lifted the glass out, climbed out the window, put the glass back up, screwed it back up, and then went for a walk. It was 30 minutes before the staff discovered he was gone and they had to call 911. Another 30 minutes later, 911 started getting calls that there was an elderly gentleman in pajamas and slippers crossing the highway trying to get to the main freeway against the light. So he was really tired by the time he got to that spot, and he sat down on the guardrail leading into I-5, which is the interstate that he was trying to get onto. And so a very savvy sheriff came up and stopped and said to him, he goes, "You look tired." And my dad goes, "Yes." And he goes, "Would you like a ride home?" He goes, "I'd love a ride home." And he goes, "Have you ever been in a police car before?" My dad said, "No." And he goes, "Come sit in the front seat. I'll tell you all about it on the way home." And he took him back. I swear to God, I would have hugged this guy if I got to meet him, because he got him back to the facility. And after they were there, the staff asked him how he escaped. It was the first time they treated him like a human being. He was so thrilled. He took them down to his room, demonstrated how the other window right next to one he took out was mounted incorrectly. And the maintenance staff went through and found that 30% of the windows in the building were mounted incorrectly, and they fixed them all. But do you think that changed how they treated him? No, you didn't. Yeah, and they would scream at him when he went towards the door or a window. So at his final escape, because he hugged his favorite nurse goodnight and saw the exit code, he waited a few minutes and then went out the door before he forgot it, and that was his last walk. And so they called me, and it was 2 days before Christmas. The stars aligned. God was smiling down on us, because that day before we had just gotten power of attorney. So we had power of attorney, and we got the call saying we had 5 days to find a new place for my dad to live. And so 5 days after Christmas, he moved in with us. And that's how really the journey started. And then the rest of the family just kind of lined up becoming ill and then getting dementia.
Wow. Tracy, as you're like walking through this, I'm thinking to myself, in the senior living, healthcare, aging in place at home, merge all those channels together, but there's become more and more of a focus on a person-centered approach to care. And as you're walking me through that, I'm thinking to myself, if we rewind that story, and what's very sad to me is you use the period 5 months. I just think of your dad for 5 months, whereas if we rewound that, am I correct in my thinking that if people had paid really more attention or different attention to your dad as an individual versus we have a group home for 6, 5 are bed bound, thus the 6th one must be bed bound too. Am I along the right path? That if this gentleman your dad just wanted to go for a walk, if someone had come in every morning, every afternoon, let's go for a walk, we could have alleviated some of this, if not all of this? Or am I on the right path there?
You're about 50% right, because my younger sister and I at the 4th facility started taking him for a walk every single day. We were alternating, but it wasn't enough exercise because we had limited time. We both worked full time. So we could only do it like during a certain window, and then we had to get back to work. So it was yes and no. I mean, if there had been somebody, but then if we could have afforded it to pay for it, we would have to have somebody there to take him for walks, to get him out and get him on a long walk and treat him. He just needed somebody to talk to and go for a walk. He just wanted to get out and be a human. So if I'd had the knowledge that I have now, then I could have probably prevented, 80% of all the things that happened with him and our family.
Yeah. And then I know too, and it's a matter of what you don't know sometimes. I know I've visited with a number of memory care communities that are really spectacular in the sense of they'll have an open courtyard, but everything around it goes circular. So for people that have moderate or late stage dementia, they can walk as often as they want, and they can go outside, and there's different ways of masking that it's a locked unit for a better term, but it's fascinating. But again, if you don't know that at the time, and then money comes into play, so many factors, but there's definitely resources out there, but it all comes back to what you don't know at the time, and what can people afford, and so forth and so on. So that led you, the care of your dad and the care of your mom and 2 other relatives. was it the book primarily? I got it, and I'm going to be totally transparent. I feel like I'm building a library of different resources, and I can easily do some clicks and buy them, which I do. And then it's like, okay, now pull out the library books and start reading, right? And that's next on my list. So I got your book recently. I have not read it. Is it all about, I think you shared with me one other time that it's about, you didn't know 75%, you learned 25%, and you put the 25% good of what you learned in that book. Do I have that story correct?
Yeah, I failed 75% of the time, and the 25% that went in is the stuff that works. And that's also why I created it like a toolbox, so that if you look, and I don't know if we can see this on the page, but I'm gonna try and hold up something.
Okay. I'm going to look on my book while
we'll see if we can do this. Let me do this. Okay, I have an 8-page table of contents. It is designed so you can run your finger down it and find the challenge of the day, turn to that page, and there will be your answers with step-by-step instructions and also explanation of why it will and won't work.
I like that. Okay, I'm opening mine as you're saying that. Okay.
So, and some other funky things I did in here, which will crack some people up, and other people are going to scratch their head going, I would have never thought of that. I have a chapter called, we'll see if we can do this, What's for Dinner? And the reason I have this in here is I had some neighbors dialing back, I lived on a street where there were 8 families that were being affected at the same time with Alzheimer's disease or some other type of dementia. And a couple of my friends didn't know how to cook. They were not the cook. And so I thought, okay, I got to make sure there's a cookbook in here for the people that aren't cooks. And so a friend of mine owns a restaurant, and she gave me the ones that she designed for her parents who also have Alzheimer's disease to help them get through. And then I rewrote it for the book to meet, people where they were, as but it's also there because not everyone wants to have a dementia book staring them in the face if they have dementia. And so you can, if you want, put a brown paper bag cover like you did with your high school books over it, right on here, Dinners for Beginners, tab chapter 13, and then have them pick out what they want for dinner.
I love that. I love that. That's creative out of the box. I like that a lot. Wow. I haven't looked. Is there anything about incontinence in here?
Yes. If you turn to page 124, it starts talking about urinary incontinence. And then on page 125 goes on, or 20, I guess 126, it talks about bowel incontinence.
Okay. I'm going to take a look. And you've got quick tips. I can see.
I've got, oh yeah. Well, because I'm a page fanner, and I was so frustrated my dad would be melting down in front of me. He'd get so upset, like we're at the table, and he'd be throwing his silverware at me. And I'm like going, okay, what do I do? I know I read a fix somewhere, and I read over 30 books, and I'm still reading books, and I'm still learning. And it was like, okay, I can remember I read it, but I couldn't find it at the time that I needed it. And so I just finally started making a catalog because I just needed to be able to find this at a moment's notice, because you're tired, you're stressed, you cannot necessarily think or problem solve. I got really lucky with the stupid one. When I was first learning how to take care of my dad's hallucinations, we had one where we were trying to get to a doctor's appointment. We had just been watching the new news, and they were talking about an anniversary for sarin gas, about when they had these scares and stuff. So we had just seen that, and it was time to go to the doctor's appointment, and I had 20 minutes baked in to get us there because it's a really close place. But it's the middle of winter. I pulled out his favorite winter coat, and he slaps it out of my hands and yells at me and says, "Tracy, get away from that. It's full of poisonous gas." Okay, I had just learned that in order to get him to a place of safety, I had to step into his shoes. So I'm like going, oh crap, pardon my language. And I had to find some way of fixing this so that we could get out of here and not be late for the doctor's appointment. And then I suddenly remembered, oh my God, I've got cleaning gloves in the bathroom. Hopefully he's not with it enough today that he won't know this won't work. And so I grabbed the cleaning gloves. I asked him, can you hold your breath? Get over here to the closet door. I want you to open the closet. I've got my gloves on. I'm going to grab the coat and throw it in. Are you ready? And I opened the door and I throw the coat in, we slam the door, and we're like leaning back against the door, and we're both panting at this point because we've been holding our breath. And he's like hyperventilating. So, and I also knew enough that he mirrored what I would do. So I just started breathing slower until I got him calming down, and then we were able to go, and we were only 5 minutes late. But and it didn't happen as fast as I'm describing it. But it was one of those things like,
Wow.
oh my God, I have to make him feel safe. I have to figure out how to help him and not tell him that you can't do this. There's no gas. I mean, why would he believe me?
Right. That is, that triggered a thought. I was at a caregiver forum this past weekend, and Dr. Rosemary Layard, who's a geriatrician out of Florida, was giving a talk to caregivers, and she took questions at the end. And one of the caregivers put her hand up and said, how do I stop from getting mad at my spouse who apparently has dementia? And Dr. Layard, and this just triggered it for me, Dr. Layard said to that caregiver in the audience, she said, you have to look at strategies when you're not mad and then implement them when you do get mad. And she gave an example of one of her caregivers that had a patient of Dr. Layard's that for whatever reason, Altoid mints triggered. If I find myself getting stressed, if I feel I'm escalating that worry, for her it worked. You put an Altoid in. Others say, just like when you have, I know for me, I knew enough when I had young children, when it was time just to leave the room, go to another room and breathe and then come back. But those strategies, and her thing was, the best piece of advice that I took home was, she said, and you have to practice. You can't just, okay, I'll do that. And then the situation comes, and if it doesn't work, you go to plan B, and if plan B doesn't, you go to C and D, and you keep going until you find something to de-escalate. And that your breathing technique that you just mentioned kind of triggered that. But I think that's magnificent. I know we are going to run out of time. I could sit here for 2 hours. Can you tell, one of the things that I think you're doing that is amazing, and I think more people need to know about it, is your work in the hardware stores, where you feel strongly that there are some tricks and tips that can help people living with dementia. I just think that's fascinating. And if you can just share a couple of points of what you're trying to accomplish and do, I bet others will find it fascinating too.
Thank you. Yes, this is very near and dear to my heart, because when my father first moved in with me, I had 5 days during Christmas to make my home dementia friendly, and it wasn't. And I didn't know what I was doing. And it wasn't until I started learning. The easiest trick is to learn about color. If you use black, it looks like a hole. If you use white, it's great for disguising and contrasting. Bright reds and bright blues are good for contrast because, and this is what I didn't understand, with dementia comes tunnel vision, also 𝗀𝗵𝗄𝗀𝗀𝗀, which means that they can only see black and white and the contrast of bright colors. So if there's not enough light for them to see a contrast, or there's not enough color contrast, they won't perceive whatever it is you're looking at, which is great if you're trying to prevent wandering, because then you could paint the door jamb, and the walls all the same color, and they'll never see it to escape. It's not an exit. So this was just one of the things that I picked up along the way. Also, pastels are great for disguising things, because if your vision is starting to fail a little bit because of dementia, or even just as we age naturally, because if you notice, as we've gotten older, it might be a little harder to see if it's not quite light enough and we don't have enough light to see. So, but using daylight lighting on a dimmer switch can help with sundowners. So at least where I live farther north, in the wintertime, it gets dark by 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So, and 3 o'clock tends to be when sundowner starts for some people, and it can go all the way until 8 o'clock. And for those of you that don't understand sundowners, it's a worsening of dementia behaviors. And so they're expressing that they're lost. And so we're trying to, and they're expressing that physically, usually by some behavior. And so if you start turning up the light at the time when they normally start sundowning, it can help with daylight lighting mitigate some of the behaviors. And then on my website, I have the meltdown trigger list on my resources page under useful forms. And I created that so that you could look at your environment and figure out what it is that might be triggering them so you can stop it. So maybe it's glare. Maybe you need to have shades over the windows that you can pull down to prevent afternoon or morning glare. If the floors are shiny, maybe you need to remove wax or cover them with something. Area rugs can be deadly, especially if somebody has, and we talked about this once, a UTI. UTIs tend to trigger falls, and so they could fall more frequently, and a area rug is not going to help them. Also, if wandering is an issue, it's then disguising things besides the doors, because obviously my dad was really good with windows. So window film works on a sliding glass door, and it then becomes art. So you could have, might be an image of a painting. It could be look like what do you call it in the church when they have the glass? Stained glass. Good luck, stained glass. I mean, there's just different things you can do. The first time somebody starts melting down over a mirror, because this usually happens in moderate dementia, the first time it happens, throw a wet paper towel on there. It'll stick to the mirror. You just take them out of the room, throw a wet paper towel up, and you walk back in. It's a whole different room. Because the really interesting thing about the brain, and this happens to all of us, is when you walk into a room, you've changed a scene. It's why we don't have problems with scene changes in movies, because our brain is automatically wired to change a scene. And so when you walk into that room, you were going to go get X, and you stand there and you're going, oh, what was I going to do when I came in here? You walk out, it's like, oh, you remember, and you walk back in. It's the same principle. So if you can, do something to disguise it, roller shades, a shower curtain will even work because they're inexpensive, or short curtains, whatever it takes to cover that mirror. If it's not in the bathroom, but it's someplace else, if they're not getting upset, don't do anything. But if they're getting upset, then remove it from the area. Because if they're thinking that a stranger is standing outside the window screaming at them or talking to them, or won't go away and just keeps looking at them, then that's time to remove it.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. I know when you speak too of, UTIs, getting to the bathroom, Dr. Layard again shared this tip recently that I thought was, what you don't know, you don't know. I never would have thought of this, but she thought, if you're living with your spouse, caring for your spouse, and you're on one side of the bed and the spouse has been on that same side of the bed for a long, long, long time, but that spouse is farthest away from the bathroom, they run the risk of, if they're still able to get up and toilet themselves, of falling because they have longer to go. So her tip was, try to make that transition to get them closer, and make sure, to your point, there are no area rugs that are going to trip. So I think it takes a village, right, for all of us to, nowadays I say, add the city and town to it too. It used to be the village. Now it's give me the city, the town, and everyone else to make change. But yeah, I could talk with you forever. I do think we need to bring you back at some point on this show. And I have not said that since we started recording, but I find your story fascinating. You share so much insight that can help people. I hope a lot more people will go and not only just buy your book, but read your book. It sounds like it's set up for quick information to be giving during a time. So thank you so much for being here. And I mean that sincerely. We need to look at the calendar and bring you back on.
Oh, I would love that, Deanna. Thank you so much.
Yeah, appreciate your insight and your time very much. Thank you.
Thank you.